Welcome to the Audio Inc. Radio podcast, featuring interviews with the biggest names in rock and metal. Hosted by Anne Erickson.
Get inked. Visit Facebook.com/Audio Inc. Radio, Twitter.com/Audio Inc. Radio, and AudioIncRadio.com for more ink. Whew, that's a lot of ink. It's AudioIncRadio.com.
You know what's really refreshing is that, I love metal music. I'm a huge fan of metal. And I think that a lot of people in metal get a reputation that, hey, we play metal. We're like tough and serious and not funny and whatever. Like, I don't know. I feel like there's this kind of image of metal, which, metal is like a heavy, hard, dark genre, but can also be fun. And I love when I find a personality in the metal scene that is just a funny person. And I have to say that Bobby Blitz from Overkill, legendary thrash metal band, he's delightful. If I had one word, it would be delightful. We're about to get into my interview with Bobby, and I was just like, really, the whole time I was laughing. He had me cracking up. Just a really funny, lighthearted, delightful kind of dude. And I think that's very refreshing in the heavy metal world. But Overkill, they're legends. They're on their 20th record, which, how can a band do that? Most bands don't even come close, but Overkill's still out there decade after decade, putting out solid music, and their new record, Scorched, out on April 14th, which I've heard the whole thing. And the thing, I tell Bobby this, the thing I like about it is that it sounds like classic Overkill, but it also has a more kind of a modern enough sound that it can sit alongside the new metal music that's out today. I love it. Overkill, I do think that they're one of the pillars of thrash metal music. You've got the big four, quote unquote, which of course is kind of controversial. And then you've got Overkill, Testament, and Exodus, who all have a huge place in that history. And we're going to talk about that and talk about a lot more fun. I promise it's going to be an extra fun episode, which it always is. It's always a fun time when you're hanging out with me. It's Anne Erickson on Audio Inc. Radio. And hey, if you don't subscribe yet, you are in the doghouse. Do it right now. Just search Anne Erickson on Audio Inc. wherever you rock out to podcast. Hit subscribe and you'll be instantly notified of the next show featuring the biggest names in rock and metal music. Don't be shy. Reach out to me on social media, Twitter and Snapchat at Anne Erickson, Instagram and TikTok at Erickson Anne. And you can head to itsmeanne.com. That's ITSMEANNE.com. Itsmeanne.com to link up on social media. If you aren't a patron yet, on my Patreon page, check that out for extra content, and you have access to my private Patreon and fun stuff like that. And finally, check out my band Upon Wings at uponwings.com. Do it. All right, I'm very excited. I'm always really thrilled with a guest, but I feel like this year on the show, we've been doing a lot of thrash metal and a lot of good stuff. This guy is a legend in the scene, but you would never know it because he's so funny and down to earth and just awesome. It's Bobby Blitz from Overkill.
Hey, what do you say, boys and girls? That's right. This is Bobby Blitz from Overkill, and we are on Audio Inc. Radio with who else but Anne Erickson. You stay tuned. You're in the right place.
Thank you for making the time.
Kind of weird. I was just, believe it or not, I was just scanning the internet, and I was reading a Kitty article on Blabbermouth, and then I looked down at the bottom, and I was like, oh, it's your interview. I'll be talking in minutes.
That is so awesome. You totally made my day.
Right on.
Cool. Well, it's great to have you on here. How are you? What's new?
Oh, geez. I suppose, obviously what's most new is Scorched. But I think beyond that, it's kind of gearing up post-lockdown pandemic, crazy couple of years. It's just kind of getting back into the swing of things, getting the changing the oil in the motor and putting new tires on and getting ready to hit the road.
Yeah, what do you think has kept Overkill together and so strong all of these years?
Well, I think it's a commonality principle. We're always looking for opportunity, whether that be on the road or in the studio or, with a record company or promotionally. so it's always kind of a push, and I think somewhere in that push, it almost becomes a game, where it's exciting that from one to the next step. I mean, when we release a record, it's done in steps, and that's we write it, we record it, we mix it, we promote it, we release it, we tour, and then we try to repeat that whole process again. And that process now is since 1985, so it works for us. And I think that if it's not broken, I mean, why fix it?
Oh, exactly. Do you ever get kind of used to the excitement of releasing a new record, or is it new and novel every time?
I think that I just mentioned principle, and I think part of the principles, or at least the motivation, is still rooted in the fact that when you're a kid and you're pursuing something like this, there's a huge amount of excitement to it. And I think it's based on, I mean, who at 18 or 19 is going to say, I mean, maybe a few, but who's going to say, I'm an artist and people need to know what I'm thinking. I think that when you're that young and you're in a heavy metal band, the motivation is, wow, this is fucking cool. So you take that all the way into adulthood and maturity, there's still a big element of that kind of excitement with regard to this. I mean, we don't sit around and over talk things. We just kind of do, as opposed to, let's say, ruining it through our own discussions or overthinking.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And is it true that this record was going to be released back in 2021, but it got postponed?
Yeah, almost exactly to the day. It was supposed to be April of 21. And that would have put us on schedule like we normally do. I mean, we're usually somewhere between 20 and 26 months between a record. And that's why so many have accumulated over these past 3 decades. But I think that we're also wise enough to know that if we don't release and tour a record, we're kind of missing one of the elements of that, that clock I talked about, the rinse and repeat kind of a thing. We have to tour the record to give it visibility, to not have it be, one of these lost entities that we were not able to tour. And that's never happened to us. So I don't know if you could say it was fear, but for sure it just didn't seem right to release during the pandemic if we were not going to be able to.
For sure. No, that totally makes sense. What is it like to hear these songs a few years later and know that other people are just now for the first time going to hear them?
That's actually kind of cool. I mean, it's, this is, again, the longest between records for us. The Wings of War was February of 2019. So you're talking 4 years between releases for us. The demo was really completed right at the beginning of Peter Pandemic and his crazy couple of years there. And, we were out on the road as per normal, and we were sent home, like the rest of the world. And I had that demo, and it was skeletal, and it was starting to develop because, drums were going to be done, and then we were going to add some bass and guitars, etc., just like any recording process. But I had so much extra time to mess with it that it's not 3 and 4 year old songs for me. That I was still writing right up until the mix, where and that was happening in November, December of last year. So for me, a bunch of the stuff is kind of fresh, and I was glad that that's the way I approached it. I mean, I wrote it, I tore it down, et cetera, repeated that. And now it's kind of has a fresh face, vocally, melodically, lyrically, as opposed to something that was written in the dark days of the pandemic. It was written on the way out, on the pushback. So kind of cool to think that maybe the music is possibly 4 years old, but by no means is the lyrical and melodic content.
Yeah, I know, that's cool. How would you describe the theme of the songs on Scorched?
Well, I mean, I was getting my balls busted the other day at the video shoot, saying, we didn't know you knew a word as big as diverse or eclectic. Kind of lunkhead metal guys, right? But it is kind of all over the map for us. I mean, I think that, one of the something that we've always had was we've had no fear to experiment in other genres. For sure, we're a thrash band, but we like to apply rock and roll to that groove, traditional heavy metal, I mean, even like big, thick 70s blues riffs, will show themselves in some of our tunes. And I think that that's probably the theme of this record is that, it's all over the map and it is eclectic. And I think that that's where the interest is. Now, I think the key beyond that is being able to not just say, hey, we're doing everything's going to be different and that's just the way it is. The key is being able to sew that all together, and put your stamp on it, which is what I think we did. Vocally, Dee Dee's bass, the tonality of the drums and the guitars. I mean, they speak Overkill through the speakers, and but through that varied vibe through it, it still is an Overkill record.
For sure. So, Overkill, you guys are one of the pillars of thrash metal. And what were those early years in thrash like when Overkill was just getting its start? Was it fun? Was it hard? What was it like?
Oh, geez, I've never been called a pillar before. Pain in the ass. My mother used to call me a pill when I was younger. I had no idea what it meant. It must have been something she got from her mother. But shit changed, obviously. I mean, it was, I think the beauty of the origins of this music was that there was really no rules to it. It was taking different genres, scientifically and musically experimenting with them by, mixing them up in the lab, whether that be the new wave of British heavy metal and West Coast punk rock for, the West Coast guys, and new wave of British heavy metal and East Coast punk for us, or maybe for the German guys, German punk. And I think that that's where it got its wings. And I always thought the unique thing about it was that it was happening simultaneously around the world when there was nothing like social media, when it was actually tape trading. If you knew a guy in Germany or in San Francisco, you might have been in contact by the phone, but the way you got your point across or your music was trading demos back and forth. It wasn't just instantaneous information. And as there was no instantaneous information, the amazing part is that it developed simultaneously in different places. But I think that the best part of it, or when the pillars were being made to hold this up, is that there was no rules. That was the best part about it. That has obviously changed. I mean, thrash is to some degree a formula this many decades later. But the exciting part at the beginning was, hey, everything goes, anything goes.
Yeah, and that is cool to think about how these musical ideas were being kind of exchanged and created all over the world at the same time, like you said, before really the internet. I mean, it's really amazing how that was able to transpire.
I mean, there's no instant information. I mean, somebody, what's the difference between then and now? It's a much smaller world right now. The world was huge back then. I remember our first tour was 86. Chernobyl in Russia just blew up. It was a big nuclear disaster, and there was these, radioactive clouds floating over Western Europe. And I remember the most important thing as I was leaving the house was my mom saying, "Do not eat any fresh vegetable."
Wow.
She read about this in the newspaper. This wasn't something that she opened her laptop and clicked on a news outlet. This was something that was being passed around by physical, daily newspapers.
Did you tour in Russia right after Chernobyl?
No, we were. That was pre Berlin Wall, or pre end of the Berlin Wall. This was 86. By 87, the end of 87, it was down, and I actually have pieces of it. Our experiences with communism back that far was we would have to go through East Germany to get to West Berlin. So you would have to ride through what was called, the border. And it was, there was a big, 100 meters of no man's land, which was a muddy kind of an area and barbed wire and all that stuff. And then you get to West Berlin. And the other was a year later, we were on tour with a German band called Halloween. So they were on Keeper of the Seven Keys, and we were doing Taking Over. We were invited to Poland for a festival. They wanted to start introducing, that side of the world to more Western music. And I think that's because, as the Scorpions say, the wind of change were happening. It was just, pretty soon thereafter, Reagan was standing up saying, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." but we got to Katowice, Poland for 2 shows in one of their arenas before that had happened, which was kind of cool.
Fascinating time in history, as is now.
Yeah, no,
Can't get away from it, you know?
it repeats itself, you know. I mean, it's a funny thing with human beings, you know. We keep going back to the same poison well to drink and expect different results, you know?
How would you describe the underground metal scene in the 80s, and how is it different from today?
Well, I have to. I'm obviously dating myself. As a dinosaur, I'm actually a proud dinosaur when it comes to this because I've had the opportunity to live through different eras. And I even think, when I think of the record, I think of the era of the present and the era of the past because, as we talked about principles earlier, I've always, kind of kept that. But the excitement of the early day was, quite. There was kind of a social media with regard to being in touch with people, but it was physical. It was you had to go to the nuclear assault show, the carnivore show. You had to go see Exodus when they were in town. You had to shake hands. You had to tell people about your band. You had to put flyers on, under windshield wipers, and on telephone poles. So it was quite a different way of getting your message out. But I mean, it didn't seem weird at the time. Somebody's probably smiling, listening to this, going, listen to this fucking old grandpa. So
No.
the point is that kind of work made it all that much more worthwhile. So I do think that that's part of, a difference between being able to sit in your computer room or your bedroom or your living room and just keep posting and posting and posting. Now, obviously, we had to reinvent ourselves to the current day to be able to stay up with this stuff. But we come from a different era, and that era is based on social contact, physical handshaking, slap on the back, and it was necessary and it was daily. And I think that that's what a bigger difference between now and then is, and that's how we made our bones, was talking to people face to face.
Yeah, I miss that. Do you think that having music so not just accessible, but kind of quote unquote easy to make has made music better for people because, anyone can release a record and you're finding musicians that maybe never could be out there? Or do you think it's been kind of a negative because it's so saturated?
But it's a double-edged sword. I mean, if your passion is music and you want to create it for yourself and, the people around you, and then something happens, globally or nationally with that passion. I mean, isn't that a great thing that you could make that on your computer and you could do it, quite affordably. I think if you're getting into it thinking it's going to be, we have all the drive and all the determination and we're the best. It's a very crowded fucking market out there. I mean, it's, you can make great sounding records in your basement, and you don't even need to know how to play perfectly to do it. So I think that's quite different too, because you can move stuff around on the computer. You can move stuff around on Pro Tools. The era I come from, you didn't get the thumbs up, the likes, unless you could stand there and play. And even if you couldn't play, if you kept pushing it and pushing it, that saying let them keep throwing the tomatoes, we'll get it one of these days. They admire you for the set of nuts that you had on yourself to be able to do that. So.
I feel like the music industry, even just the past 5 years or 10 years, has changed so much. I mean, I'm thinking I have a band, and like when we released something 10 years ago, there was no one out there. And now it's like, forget it. I mean, there's so many people. It's just crazy to me how quickly it's evolving.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge interest. There's a lot of affordability with regard to, recording. I mean, people, we do demos now that sounded like our first records. When Dee starts a demo at his studio, he's running it through a board. He's got 40 channels. He's got Pro Tools. I'm like, Jesus, demo sounds better than the first 4 records.
That's cool. I feel like when I listen to Scorched, It sounds kind of, classic Overkill, but you guys do still sound like modern enough to like fit alongside these bands that are doing everything on Pro Tools, if that makes sense.
That's kind of a cool analogy. I think I spoke just earlier in one of the answers about being in two eras, and I think that it has the present day punch and value to it. I mean, one of the biggest things to me is being valid in the current day, not being being in the novelty vinyl part of the record store. You know what I mean? It's like, oh great. But it also comes from another era, and I think that you can hear it in the production that with as much as we wanted to sound relatively modern, we mixed a lot of drum resonance into the drums from the room. We scooped out the guitars like an older vibe, like from Days Gone By. Not us, but it was Colin Richardson and his partner Chris Clancy. But they had this kind of had this current day punch on those kick drums, but it had this kind of early 90s guitar sound to it that it kind of gave the past a fresh face. And I think when I listen to it, it's like I've heard this before, but damn it, it sounds fresh. So I think that that's probably the that audible view of this record is the way I feel about it. That it's that we haven't lost those principles, or what we thought sounded good back then. We're just kind of updating.
100%. I think that's one reason why so many of your older fans and new fans find something to appreciate. So there's been a lot of talk lately about the big four and about how like Overkill, Exodus, and Testament, you guys were left out. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on the big four? And do you think Overkill should be part of like a big five?
The big who?
A big five.
Who's the big what? Who were the original ones? The big who? The big. I'm
You're
sorry.
humoring me, please.
I'm being an asshole.
Okay. I was like,
Oh my God, he is a dinosaur. I don't. I've never really concerned myself with that, and I'm not saying it like I'm the guy. I never read comments about myself. I really could give a rat's ass. I mean, I understand how it's. This is based on sales. I mean, Dee Dee and I are not just a couple of guys who were, we're not sitting on the hood of the car drinking beer all these years. We manage the band. So, I mean, we understand why a big four even exists. And that's because of their popularity and the fact that they move units. So if you would look at a big five, you'd have to look at whoever moved the next most amount of units. And I don't know if that's us or Testament. Or Exodus for that matter. I don't follow it like that. Units are a lot different in the current day because it's more about streaming as opposed to physical things you put in your hand. But I do think, what they did. Metallica obviously changed. The whole game was changed with Kill 'Em All, and the stuff that followed with Slayer and Anthrax and the Megadeth guys have done a lot for all those on other tiers in this scene because. Listen, if we're in the second tier to the big four, there's a third tier that are kind of hoping they could be in the second tier with us.
right.
But the point is that if you worry about it, you don't enjoy the journey. And that's really the point of this whole thing it's not about gaining worldwide success or domination. It's about enjoying the journey. And I say it all the time. I said it's been 40 years in engineer boots and Levi's. I mean, what better testimony is there to a life well lived if you had rock and roll in your soul? So I don't really concern myself with it, but I do appreciate the fact that they've brought this type of music to the masses.
Oh, I think that's well stated for sure. Do you have any thoughts on the Pantera reunion?
Oh yeah, I'd love to see it. I mean, I'm when it comes around here, I'm going to go. I mean, I think it's just a great thing. There's just, they were, the band itself, the original band itself was just so groundbreaking with regard to how they morphed into that, reinventing the steel vibe, the Cowboys from Hell on. I mean, it was just amazing. And I think it, if anything, deserves to be celebrated, especially with original members there, at least 50% of them, obviously. I mean, this is the project or the I don't know, the event that needs to be celebrated and seen.
What are your thoughts on the state of metal music today? Do you think it's in a good place?
Well, I think it's finally morphing into something else. I think, I always thought it was kind of a funny thing that this was, one of the some of the ingredients that we talked about earlier, whether it be new wave of British heavy metal or punk. I mean, there's some angst in that punk, and angst is a young man's game. That's something that, late teenagers and early 20s are like, they're the anarchists or the real anarchists. So it was kind of like Winston Churchill says, you're not an anarchist at 18, you know, you have no heart, but if you're still one at 45, you have no brain. So, but but I think that it's morphing, and you see different bands, taking a lead and being able to fill arenas, and there's subgenres of the original metal. I mean, you take Falling in Reverse, for example. It's for sure a metal band or a hard band, and what they're doing with their stuff. Listen, it's not necessarily my cup of tea, but I can sure as hell respect the fact that they are selling some fucking tickets and appealing to the youth out there that wants to bang their head, move around, or get into a pit. So I kind of see it morphing into a newer vibe, a newer presentation, and again back to the arena sized bands again.
Awesome. So what is next for you and Overkill? Hopefully some tour dates.
Well, yeah, we right on the release we'll be in Europe. We'll actually have landed the day before the release and be doing a show that night. So we'll be touring as it's released. Germany, primarily Western Europe. We're staying away from the war-torn area at this point. And then back home in May, hopefully I can watch some of the hockey playoffs before we go out in June. And we're going to do June and July in the States. Looking for some support right now. Europe is going to be Ex-Quarter and Heathen. So it'll be a nice metal package, large club kind of a thing, 1,500 seat rooms, 1,500 to 2,000. So it's going to be good. It's a good way to start it, just like get out there and just do it. Do what you do best.
Yeah, those are all great lineups, and I'm excited for the tour here in the States. And did you know, I'm sure you noticed this, that Overkill's new record comes out the same day as Metallica. So I was like, wow, what a day for Thrash this year.
Okay, one more time. Ready? Who?
I love it.
I did know. Yes, I did know. Wasn't planned, but I actually thought afterwards that, it gives you that little crooked smile saying, all right, we're going to show them who's boss.
Definitely. I think it's cool. Thrash fans, metal fans will be in heaven that day. So it works.
It's going to be awesome. Yes. I think it's a big day. There's somebody else coming out. I know. Oh, a friend of mine over in Europe, a band called Holy Moses. She's releasing her she's like the original death metal singer. And she had me sing on one of the tracks with her. But it's like, it's like singing with Barnes from 6 Feet Under or George Corpse Grinder. It's like she's just got some voice on her.
That's awesome. Well, Bobby, it's been awesome chatting. Thank you so much for hanging out, and congrats on the awesome new record. Cannot wait for that tour.
And it's always a pleasure. I appreciate your time. Let's all go out there on the 14th of April and get ourselves scorched.
Bobby, thank you for being an awesome guest on my show. You rock. And hey, you're welcome back anytime. That new record, it's a banger. I love it. Scorched. The promise that if you love heavy metal, which hopefully you do if you hang out with me, because it's kind of a prerequisite, you could say, of hanging out with me. You have to love heavy metal. That's not true, actually, because a lot of my friends don't listen to metal. They're into pop and all that stuff. But hey, I love them anyway. Regardless, I digress. I'm saying that if you love heavy metal, you have to check out Scorched, because it is an awesome set of music. And I cannot wait to hear about that Overkill tour. I've actually never seen them live in concert, and yeah, I think it's going to be a great show. All the footage that I've always seen of them online is absolutely brutal in the best way. It's Anne Erickson. As always, you rock, and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast if you don't yet. Do it right now. It's very easy. Just search Anne Erickson on Audio Inc. wherever you rock out to podcast. Hit subscribe, and you'll be instantly notified every time there's a new show featuring the biggest names in rock and metal music. Reach out to me on social media. I would love to get a suggestion for the show for a guest, or if you just want to talk about music or whatever. You can find me on Twitter and Snapchat at Anne Erickson, Instagram and TikTok at Erickson Anne. Or you can head to itsmeanne.com. That's ITSMEANNE.com, itsmeanne.com to link up on social media. If you'd like more content and access to everything private on Patreon, check out my Patreon. You'll find the link in the show description, and you get some fun, I would say, previews sometimes of what's ahead before anyone else, and just you get access to my private Patreon. It's an awesome thing, so check that out. And finally, my band, Upon Wings, at uponwings.com. Once again, you rock. Thank you very much for hanging with me on the show and for being a part of my life. Until next time, be safe, God bless, and we'll rock soon. It's Anne Erickson on Audio Inc. Radio.
It's Audio Inc. with Anne.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Audio Inc. Radio podcast. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. Get inked online at audioinkradio.com. I'm Anne Erickson for the Audio Inc. Radio podcast.